The village of Black Hollow had no streetlights. It wasn't due to neglect or poverty. Locals said it was a tradition, one kept since the founding of the village centuries ago. At night, every window was shuttered, every lamp extinguished. The darkness there was whole, thick as velvet, and it pressed gently against the wooden cottages like a familiar blanket. It was said that to leave a light burning after midnight invited attention. No one ever said from whom. Elia arrived just before dusk. Her car's tires crunched along the gravel road, and the sky above her bled into shades of bruise-colored blue. She was tired. Physically, yes, from the long drive, but more so in that quiet, soul-deep way that comes after too much loss. She had inherited her aunt's cottage on the edge of the hollow, a crooked little place nestled among whispering pines. It looked smaller than she remembered, the roof slouched a little more, the chimney grayer, but it had the same iron bell over the front door. It had the same scent of moss and dried herbs, and it still held that low, steady hush in the walls, like the house was listening. The neighbors greeted her with polite nods and soft voices. No one lingered. One elderly man, tall and paper-thin, handed her a lantern with a brass handle. "Best not to keep electric light on past 12, he said, not unkindly. "If you need to see, use this." She smiled awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. He didn't smile back. That night, Elia unpacked slowly, listening to the wind slip between the shutters. Around 11, she brewed tea in the old kettle and wrapped herself in a quilt by the fireplace. The silence of Black Hollow was unlike anything she had known. Deeper than city silence, older. It settled around her with a kind of hush that felt expectant. At precisely midnight, the fire guttered. Not out, just smaller, as if something had leaned in close and drawn a long, slow breath. Then she heard it, a whisper, too soft to catch the words, too near to be the wind. She sat still, heart gently stirring, breath shallow. Then it was gone. She waited for several minutes, tea cooling in her hand. The lantern the old man had given her sat untouched on the counter. She rose, walked over, and lit it. Its glow was soft, warm, and within it, the dark no longer felt empty. From outside the window, beyond the glass, a faint figure stood at the edge of the trees. Not moving, watching. She blinked. It was gone. The next morning, the neighbors said nothing when she mentioned it. Only the old man spoke. "It always starts with the whisper," he murmured. The fog came early the next evening. Elia stood at the threshold of her aunt's cottage, the iron bell above the door chiming faintly in the breeze. The trees were just shadows now, veiled in slow-moving mist that curled along the ground like fingers reaching for something forgotten. The villagers had already shuttered their homes. Doors were bolted, curtains drawn. Not a single candle flickered behind the windows, except hers. She hesitated, lantern in hand. The soft amber light made the shadows dance gently across the cottage walls. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just gentle reminders that the dark outside had weight. She didn't want to be afraid. Black Hollow was beautiful in a strange way, peaceful, timeless. But the whisper still echoed in her mind from the night before, not as sound but as sensation. It had spoken beneath thought, beneath language. And somehow, she knew it hadn't come from outside the cottage. That night, just before 12, the fog thickened. It rolled in slow, deliberate waves across the forest floor, smothering every path and landmark. The pines stood tall, their upper branches fading into gray. Elia kept the lantern near as she moved through the cottage, checking locks out of habit. The hearth was cold tonight. She hadn't bothered lighting it. Midnight came. The lantern dimmed just slightly. And then came the whisper again. Closer, clearer, still no words. Just a low breath that touched her ear and vanished before her heart could fully react. She turned. No one. And yet, something had shifted. The room felt occupied. She moved slowly to the window, peering out into the fog. It clung to the ground, curling around the small garden fence like lace. Then she saw them, eyes pale, almost glowing, watching from beyond the tree-line. Not one pair, several, dozens. They didn't blink. They didn't move. She stepped back from the window, the breath in her throat shallow and slow. The lantern flickered again. A low creaking sound came from the hallway behind her. Floorboards shifting under weight that wasn't hers. She turned, lips slightly parted, but her voice refused to come. The hall was empty. Then softly, so softly, the bell above the front door chimed once. Just once. Elia stood perfectly still, the lantern casting long shadows behind her. And for the first time since arriving in Black Hollow, she wondered if her aunt had really passed away from illness, or if something had come for her in the fog. Elia didn't sleep that night. She sat near the hearth until the sky turned a pale, reluctant gray, the kind of morning light that seemed unsure if it should arrive at all. The lantern stayed lit beside her, casting its gentle glow across the floorboards as the whisper's echo gradually faded into silence. When she finally stepped outside, the fog had receded, retreating to the edges of the forest like a tide drawn back by some unseen pull. The trees were still, the village quiet, but something had changed. A small package lay at her doorstep, wrapped in deep green cloth, tied with a single silver thread. She stared at it for a long while before reaching down. It was surprisingly warm to the touch. Inside, carefully folded, was an old letter and a bundle of dried herbs tied with twine. The letter smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. The handwriting was familiar, her aunt's. If you found this, then you've already heard them. The whispers, they are not spirits. They are not of this world. They watch from between, always from between. Do not light the fire again. Do not sing. And whatever you do, never follow the silver thread. With love always, Mara. Elia read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. The warning seemed absurd, surreal. Yet her hands trembled as she held the thread between her fingers. She knew deep down that she would follow it anyway. That night, the fog returned. Not as thick, but more restless. It swirled in tighter spirals around the garden gate. The iron bell above the door didn't ring, yet Elia knew someone was standing on the other side. She lit the lantern. The light bent strangely, like it was being drawn toward the hallway. And when she stepped forward, she saw it, a single silver thread. It trailed from the front door, across the floor, and disappeared into the shadows beneath the cellar door. She didn't speak, didn't breathe too loudly. She simply followed. Her bare feet made no sound as she crossed the creaking floor. The thread shimmered faintly in the lantern's glow, leading her onward like a path drawn by moonlight. The cellar door groaned as she opened it. The air below was cool, damp, still. She stepped carefully down the steps, each one whispering beneath her weight. The thread continued along the packed earth floor, winding past the shelves of old preserves and broken jars. And then, at the far wall, she saw it. A small wooden door she had never noticed before, set low and narrow, as though made for someone far smaller than her. The thread disappeared beneath it. She leaned down, breath steady, and listened. No sound. Not at first. Then, a hum, so faint she almost thought it was in her own mind. But no, it was a song. Low, soft, like someone humming to themselves just on the other side. Her hand hovered over the latch. The lantern flickered. The humming stopped. And a voice, raspy, cold, impossibly close, whispered, "Too soon." The silver thread snapped. Elia stumbled back, heart racing but feet slow, as if the air itself resisted her retreat. The cellar grew darker. The door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. And from behind her, the soft creak of the tiny wooden door opening just a crack. Elia did not turn around. The crack in the small wooden door behind her remained narrow, but the presence it released into the cellar was unmistakable. It wasn't a gust of air or a burst of sound. It was silence, a dense, suffocating stillness that felt like a thing alive. The lantern's glow dimmed, narrowing to a tight circle around her feet. She backed away slowly, one careful step at a time, until her hand found the stair rail. The cellar door above remained closed. She tried it once, gently, It was locked from the other side. Of course it was. She stood there for a long moment, caught between the sealed door above and the slightly open one behind. The lantern guttered once, its wick flickering in a directionless breeze. Then, just as she took another breath, a sound, soft, subtle, like something dragging its hand across the inside of the small wooden door. Fingernails across wood. 1, 2, 3 passes. Then a whisper, louder than before, but no less haunting. Mara! Elia froze. Her aunt's name. She turned just slightly, enough to glance over her shoulder at the crooked little door. The crack had widened. Darkness bled from it. Not shadow, not absence of light, but something else. Something deeper. It stretched outward in faint tendrils, reaching across the cellar floor like ink in water. Mara! The voice whispered again. Then a pause. Then, faintly, you came back. Elia stepped back, her spine pressed now to the cellar door. I'm not Mara, she said, voice low but steady. She's gone. Silence. Then a soft giggle. Childlike. The crack in the door didn't widen further, but the dark continued to spread. The lantern began to shake in her hands. Names change, the whisper murmured. Faces fade. But we remember the light you stole. The lantern went out. For several long seconds, there was only breath, the sound of her own, and the slow creak of that tiny door opening wider behind her. Then, a click. The lock above released. Elia didn't wait. She turned and bounded up the stairs, nearly dropping the lantern. As she reached the top, she threw the door open, stumbled through it, and slammed it shut behind her. The sound of the bell above the front door chimed once, soft and slow. Then silence. Elia didn't leave the cottage the next day. Rain came in slow, steady sheets, veiling the windows and muting the world beyond the pines. She sat at her aunt's old desk by the back window, the bundle of herbs and the strange letter beside her. She hadn't dreamed that night, or maybe she had, but the memory of it was gone. What remained was a sensation, like something had tried to take root in her thoughts and failed. The silver thread was gone. The cellar remained closed, but the tiny door below still pulsed in her thoughts like a heartbeat. That afternoon, as the rain grew heavier, she opened the old chest in the corner of the study. Inside were notebooks, Mara's journals. Some dated back decades. Others were older still, the pages yellowed and brittle. But one was newer, bound in black leather. The spine creaked when she opened it. Inside were drawings, sketches of the cellar, the small door, the thread, and a map. It showed the village, not as it was now, but as it had been. A ring of cottages, a chapel, a well. But beneath it, drawn in thin red ink, were tunnels, chambers, names scrawled in the margins. The listening place, the sleeper's arch whispering hollow. And in the center, the nameless door. Below it, written in careful script. To seal what was opened, the last light must be remembered. Elia traced the red lines with her fingertip. Her aunt had known, had mapped it, had planned something, but what? She turned the page. A final note, barely legible, smudged with what looked like ash. If you hear your name in the dark, do not answer. The rain had stopped by midnight. A stillness settled over Black Hollow. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that made the trees seem too quiet, as if even the wind dared not speak. Elia sat in the study, the map open before her, lantern glowing faintly at her elbow. The journal's ink felt warm under her fingers, as though the page itself remembered being written. She traced the path again, down through the cellar, beyond the nameless door, into something labeled only as the listening place. Her heart whispered for her to wait, but the house whispered something else. A low hum rose from beneath the floorboards, not mechanical, not from pipes or heaters. It was organic, almost musical, like a voice buried beneath layers of wood and stone, humming to itself in a forgotten key. She lit another lantern, descended the cellar stairs. This time, the door at the top didn't lock behind her. But the air had changed, colder now, heavier. The small wooden door at the far wall remained shut. But as she approached, It opened on its own with a soft, breathy click. Behind it was no longer just dirt and brick. A tunnel stretched out, narrow, arched, and lined with ancient stones slick with moisture. The silver thread was gone, but her path was marked. Faint scratches on the wall every 10 paces, like someone counting in desperation. She stepped through. The moment her foot touched the stone, the air changed. Sound vanished. Not just voices, but everything. Her breath made no sound. Her steps were swallowed by the floor. Even her heartbeat, once pounding in her ears, became distant. She had entered the listening place. It wasn't long before she saw them. Marks along the wall that weren't scratches, but symbols, carved with trembling hands. Circles within circles. Shapes like twisted ears and reaching mouths. The walls remembered things here. She could feel it. The path led downward in a spiral. Slowly, softly, like sleep descending. The deeper she went, the more the silence thickened, until even her thoughts felt hushed. And then, without warning, the tunnel opened into a chamber. It was vast, hollow. In the center stood a single figure. Cloaked, unmoving, its back to her. Lantern light didn't reach its face. Elia froze. The figure didn't turn. Instead, a voice, hers, but not hers, echoed inside her mind. You opened the door. She couldn't move. You followed the thread. The figure raised a pale hand, long-fingered, still. You carry her name. Then the voice changed, softer, more distant. You are the last light. The chamber trembled. Then, the lantern in her hand blew out. And Elia remembered something her aunt had once told her long ago, on a night much like this one, when she was small. The dark doesn't hate you, love. It just wants to know your name. Darkness. Heavy. Total. The lantern's extinguished light left Elia with nothing but the memory of glow, and even that faded quickly in the depth of the listening place. She didn't scream, there was no use. Her voice wouldn't echo here. It wouldn't exist here. Something about the silence was alive. Not threatening, not yet, but observant, listening, patient. She took one step back, her boot sole scraping softly against the stone. That sound at least returned, and with it, a sudden exhale, as if the cavern itself had been holding its breath and had finally chosen to release it. The cloaked figure remained still, but its presence had grown, or multiplied. Around the edges of the chamber, more shapes emerged. Not figures, not people, silhouettes, impressions of once beings, clinging to the walls like wet paper, as if memory had pressed itself into the rock and refused to fade. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, one by one, in a soft violet hue, lighting the room with the dim shimmer of distant starlight. The central figure turned. His face was blank, not inhuman, just unfinished, as though someone had started carving a mask from bone and then stopped, unsure what expression to give it. In its hands, it held a thin silver thread, the very one Elia had followed. You carry echoes, it said, not aloud, but within her mind. Its voice was and wasn't hers, and sounded like it had come from behind her own eyes. So many lights trapped in your name. She tried to speak, but her thoughts tangled. The figure stepped forward. We are what she gave up. A dozen whispers, soft as feathers, swept through the chamber. Elia turned, slowly, and saw that the silhouettes on the wall had begun to move. Just slightly, a flicker here, a shifting there, like shadows remembering how to breathe. Mara sealed us, said the figure, but the door remembers. The thread it held unraveled, floating toward Elia like a strand of mist, coiled gently around her wrist, cool, weightless. Suddenly, behind her, another door appeared, formed not from stone or wood, but of memory. Images flickered across its surface. A cottage in the pines, a girl standing by a well, a woman's hand lighting a lantern, her aunt, herself. Then, a sudden pull. She stumbled forward, not from the thread, but from the door. It opened just an inch. A rush of scent escaped. Cedar, smoke, earth. You must remember, said the figure, or you will become part of the wall. Elia stared at the glowing door. Pulsed softly, like breath. She stepped through. On the other side was not another chamber, but a memory. She stood now in a field of soft grass beneath a twilight sky. The cottage was in the distance, lanterns in its windows, smoke curling from the chimney. She could hear laughter, her own voice young and small. Beside her was her Aunt Mara. They were collecting flowers. "Every petal holds a whisper," Mara said, "and if you listen closely, you can hear the stories of those who once walked here." Young Elia giggled. "Like ghosts." Mara smiled. "Not quite. Ghosts are what's left when we forget. These are what remain when we remember." And just like that, Elia was back in the listening place. The door was closed behind her. The thread had vanished. The cloaked figure was gone. But the chamber was empty now. Still, waiting. She turned. And at the far end of the hall, carved into the wall, were 6 new words she hadn't noticed before. "One light must stay behind. Always." Elia left the listening place in silence. The passage behind her collapsed, not with force, but with forgetfulness. As she stepped away, the walls faded, the door vanished, and the memory of that place began to dim like breath on a mirror. By the time she reached the cellar again, the lantern in her hand was glowing once more. She didn't question it. Above her, the cottage had changed. The furniture was the same, the walls still lined with old books and dried herbs, but everything had shifted subtly, as if the house had aged a decade in a single night. The kitchen clock ticked more slowly. The window panes were fogged with something that looked less like condensation and more like old breath. Outside, dawn had not yet come. Elia wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the mist. The air was still damp from the previous rain, and the trees of Black Hollow stood watchful in the early dark, their branches unmoving. A crow somewhere gave a single caw, then fell silent again. She followed the path behind the cottage, one worn into the earth by generations of quiet steps, and arrived at the old stone well. Her aunt's journals had spoken of it, not as a water source but as a place of memory, a kind of vessel. Elia approached carefully. The stone was covered in moss, but beneath it, she could still see the carvings, sigils and spirals, faded from time. The rope was gone, the bucket too. Only the circular opening remained. She peered in. No bottom, just darkness. But as she listened, she heard it. Not water, not wind, but a voice. Not whispering, singing. A lullaby, soft, wordless, ancient. A melody without lyrics, like the hum a mother gives when the words have long since left her. Elia leaned closer, and the song grew louder. "Mara used to sing to the well," came a voice behind her. Elia turned. An old woman stood at the edge of the woods, cloaked in blue, with silver hair tied in a braid that touched her waist. Her eyes were a color Elia couldn't name, clouded, not by age, but by memory. She thought it would sleep if she did, that the dreams would be quiet. Elia stepped back from the well. "Who are you?" The woman smiled softly. "The last watcher." Before her, she walked forward slowly, placing a hand on the rim of the well. But dreams never sleep. They wait. They grow hungry. The woman looked at Elia, her eyes suddenly clearer. "You opened the door." Elia nodded. "I didn't mean to." The woman shook her head. "No one ever does. But now it calls you." She turned, gesturing toward the forest. "There's one place left, the hollow itself." Elia followed her gaze. A narrow path wound between the trees, deeper than she'd ever gone. The fog seemed to part only for that trail, revealing nothing of what lay beyond. The woman pressed something into her hand. A charm, small, woven from hair and thorn. Pulsed once, faintly warm. "You'll need this, not for protection, but for remembering." "Remembering what?" Elia asked. The woman's smile faded. "What you are, and what she gave up to keep you from becoming it." Then, without another word, she walked into the trees and vanished. The singing from the well had stopped. The forest waited. And Elia, lantern in hand, stepped onto the path that would lead her to Black Hollow's heart. The path narrowed quickly. Branches arched overhead like cathedral beams, laced with mist and soft with age. Elia's footsteps were muffled by a thick carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves. Even the birds, usually bold at this hour, had fallen still. The charm the old woman had given her pulsed faintly in her palm, like a sleeping heartbeat. She kept it close. As she walked, the forest deepened, not in density, but in something stranger, presence. It began with the scent, first earth and moss, then iron. Then the sweet, almost metallic tang of something very old and recently disturbed. She didn't panic. She let the rhythm of her breath guide her. Slow, steady, patient. The way her aunt had taught her when storms rattled the cottage windows and Elia couldn't sleep. Eventually, the trees began to change. They widened, twisted. Their roots burst from the ground like frozen waves. Some trunks bent to form arches over the path. Others curved together to create doorways into the unknown. The bark was smooth in places, etched with symbols that hummed gently when she passed. The lantern flickered. Then, up ahead, the forest opened. Elia stepped into a clearing where the ground sank into a wide, shallow basin, the hollow. It was not empty. Roots spread across the earth like veins, converging at a central mound where a lone figure stood waiting. Cloaked in dark cloth, face shadowed, it held a staff of twisted ash. At its feet, the earth breathed, slowly rising and falling like lungs beneath stone. The air here was thick with memory. Elia descended without a word. The figure spoke first. "She never told you what she did she?" Its voice was both man and woman, old and young, like all tones at once, layered into one quiet question. Mara made a bargain. One light for many shadows. "You." Elia stood still. "What do you mean?" The figure pointed at the charm in her hand. "You were born from forgetting. A thread pulled loose from something darker. She used it to weave you into the world, and to seal the rest behind." The mound beneath them pulsed once, deep and slow. But memory doesn't like to be buried. The charm grew warmer. The figure stepped aside, revealing a doorway in the earth, made not of stone or wood, but of roots, spiraled into an arch. Within, darkness swirled softly, like a tide waiting to rise. "You must go," the figure said, "and remember what she traded to keep the dark dreaming." Elia hesitated. Her breath caught, but her heart, steady and silent, told her this was the end of the path she had unknowingly stepped onto the night she arrived. She stepped through the root door, and everything changed. She was no longer in the hollow. She stood on the edge of a black ocean beneath a sky that pulsed with violet stars. The ground was made of memory. Pages, photographs, strands of hair, a child's shoe, all woven into a shoreline that stretched forever. In the distance stood the cottage. But it wasn't hers. It was older, cracked and leaning. Smoke rose from the chimney in a spiral that never stopped. She walked toward it. Each step whispered names she did not recognize. Lives long forgotten, memories once sealed in the roots of the hollow. Inside, Mara stood at the hearth, younger, crying. She turned when Elia entered, and her eyes widened, not with surprise, but with sorrow. "I didn't want you to see this." Elia approached. "What is this place?" "Where I came to give them what they wanted. My memory, my light, my child." The floor trembled. Outside, the sea began to rise. "They wanted someone to remember them," Mara said. "Someone to keep them from fading." She handed Elia something. A mirror, cracked and clouded. Elia looked inside, and saw herself not as she was, but as she had been 1,000 times before. A repeating shape, a vessel, always the same eyes, always the same shadow waiting behind them. "It's your choice now," Mara whispered. "Wake them, or forget again." The cracked mirror in Elia's hands pulsed once, softly, like the dying glow of an ember. She couldn't look away. Inside it, 1,000 versions of herself stared back. Some wept, others raged. A few simply stood, still and silent, with empty eyes. All of them carried the same weight, the inheritance of memory. "You are the thread," Mara whispered, "woven and unwoven, bound and unbound." Elia turned. The hearth was dying behind her, flames flickering low, casting shadows that danced in unnatural patterns along the crooked walls. The sound of the rising sea grew louder, waves of memory lapping at the shore of forgetting. "If I stay," Elia asked, voice trembling, "what happens?" Mara's gaze fell to the floor. "The hollow is sealed again. You become the lock. The dream continues. Nothing wakes. And if I go, then they remember. All of them, the ones buried in the walls, the ones whose names faded. The village, me, you." The mirror in Elia's hands warmed. It was asking her. One light must stay behind. Always. She closed her eyes and made her choice. When she awoke, she was standing at the well. Dawn had touched the sky with pale gold. The forest whispered gently. A light mist hovered above the earth. In her palm was the charm. It had gone cold. The cottage stood behind her, unchanged.
Familiar.
Yet, something was different. Inside, the books on the shelf bore new titles. A journal lay open on the table, its pages blank, save one. "To remember is to become." Elia sat beside the hearth and lit the lantern. His flame was steady now. Outside, the wind stirred the trees of Black Hollow, and somewhere far beneath, in the quiet halls of the listening place, the shadows had settled. Not vanished, but sleeping again. Not forgotten, but remembered gently. Elia would be their witness. The last light. The dream would go on, and so would she.